All right, everybody. Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Advocate LSU Sports Update. I'm football beat writer Wilson Alexander, joined again by my colleague Leah Vann, not reporting a story in Lafayette today, as you were last week, but I'm sure enjoying the weather that we're having here in Baton Rouge. A lot of running, as I understand it, right now.
Yes, it's like peak running season for me. I'm training for that Tiger 10K and then the Louisiana half. So perfect weather for this. I went on a 3-mile run this morning.
Well, good for you and good luck as you continue training. It's also perfect football weather, and that's what we're here to talk about. LSU, of course, coming off a big 45-35 win over Florida to bounce back after getting kind of run out of Tiger Stadium the week before by Tennessee. Now heads into this game with Ole Miss. And suddenly, Tigers are 5-2, one loss in the SEC, tied with Alabama for second in the SEC West, going up against undefeated Ole Miss here, ranked number 7. And all of a sudden, even though it's maybe a little bit early to be talking about this kind of thing, they do have a chance here to really stay in the SEC West race, which was kind of unfathomable this time a week ago to think about that, but it is possible. And so let's start before we get into that Ole Miss matchup and everything that kind of comes with it. Let's start with one of the reasons I think maybe fans can feel good about the possibility of LSU winning this game, and that's the passing offense and what Jaden Daniels was able to do, the strides that he made along with Kayshawn in that game. Obviously ended up throwing for 349 yards, accounting for 6 total touchdowns. Leah, what did you see from Jaden in particular in this game that was maybe surprised you, or just what did you see from him that you really took away and that maybe it's a reason for that performance?
He ran the ball less. I think he only had 44 yards rushing in that game, which is kind of on the low end. I mean, he's kind of fluctuated throughout the season, right? But I felt like maybe there were times where he was taking shots downfield where he normally wasn't taking shots downfield, which I guess we had been saying for weeks now that he should be more patient in his progressions and look for those receivers downfield. I also of course, you mentioned Kayshawn Boutte, finally had his breakout game. So he's finally looking to those key wide receivers rather than just kind of bailing and getting it to Mason Taylor. Not that Mason Taylor is a bad option, but you don't want your tight end to be your number one target, and he wasn't in this game. So I think that was a huge point of emphasis for this offense. What were your thoughts?
I like what you said there about the tight end in particular, just that Mason Taylor is someone who they really like long term, but in year one as a freshman, when you have Kayshawn and Malik and all this group of wide receivers that everyone talked about back since media days, if not before that, about being maybe one of the best groups in the SEC, if not in the country, it's those are the guys that should be featured. And Mason ended up with, I think, 1 catch, and it was a solid catch over the middle. But Cole Taylor, I think, maybe had 2. But they were a complement to the passing game, not necessarily the entire focus of the passing game like they had been in some previous games. Like you said, ball getting, hitting accurate downfield throws. He had seemed to be a little bit more aggressive and try to get into some tighter windows against Tennessee to some success. Obviously, LSU only scored 13 points in that game. But it was just amazing how much of a leap he took even a week later. Even instead of little continued incremental steps, he took a massive one forward with that entire passing offense, throwing into windows, into tight windows downfield. He was 5 for 8 on throws over 15 yards, easily a season high. And he was also, it resulted in a 15.2 yards per completion, which was also easily a season high. His receivers are also making plays, and the timing between them was just so much better. I'd go back to just these little hitch routes with Kyron Lacey in the second half. Jaden was throwing the ball before Kyron even turned around. Those were usually plays this season where the guy had already turned around and was maybe waiting for the ball, and that's why a defender was able to come in and break it up. The timing was just infinitely better. They've been working on that trust for a few weeks, but it was so much improved. Do you feel like also just the play of the receivers, because you wrote specifically about Kayshawn that day and we talked to him yesterday, do you feel like there was also something about the play of the receivers that was improved in that game?
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, I feel like there were fewer drop passes. I would have to go back and check, but I felt like, throughout this season, we've seen some uncharacteristic drops from really all of LSU's receivers, and especially Kayshawn, and especially even Malik Neighbors, but just Malik, he was one of the highest targeted. So I wouldn't give that much weight. But yeah, I felt like there were fewer drops. I felt like there was better chemistry overall with the receivers. And I think you already spoke to all the stats about like making plays and yards after catch. I mean, you go back and we can look at kind of those chunk plays that LSU had, and let me just scroll here. And, Malik Neighbors, 17-yard completion down in I think that was the second quarter. But kind of the bigger ones, like the 40-yard catch by Booty. And then you've got the, let's see. Yeah. So I just felt like there were times that players were able to extend plays. And overall, on the flip side of that, we got to talk about the defense not giving up chunk plays to other teams, which has been kind of a problem through these past 2 games against Tennessee and Ole Miss. What does LSU have to do to kind of prevent that from happening against this rushing offense?
Yeah, it has been an issue now for the last 3 games. LSU, going back to that Auburn game, has allowed 21 plays over 20 yards. It's kind of a mix of run and pass. Auburn, it was primarily through the air. LSU was expecting Auburn to run the ball quite a bit. They came out, they were pass heavy. It took LSU a half to adjust. Obviously, in the second half, didn't allow a point, but it took them some time there and put them in an early hole. And there was a lot of big plays in that game, and some tackling issues. And then same thing against Tennessee. You can kind of chalk it up maybe a little bit to Tennessee's offense and how good that group clearly is. But still, LSU was struggling to tackle on the perimeter. And then there was multiple just big plays in that game. And then again against Florida, you had the 39-yard touchdown run at the very beginning, and then Anthony Richardson's 81-yard touchdown run. Outside of that, there wasn't a ton of big plays. There was a couple others, but nothing that really broke the defense. But it was still just this sort of continued trend of tackling issues. Brian Kelly said pretty simply on Monday, that's what it comes down to. LSU's got to tackle better. We talked to some players yesterday. They said they were focusing a lot on the little details of tackling, even situational awareness, knowing, okay, if it's 3rd and 3, I don't need to drop back. My depth needs to be closer to the line of scrimmage. But this has been an issue. And even going back to the Florida State game, tackling has been not necessarily a strength. It looked like it was improved there for a while, and then now the last 3 games, it's something that LSU's had to focus on, and that's going to be an issue possibly against Ole Miss in particular. If LSU can't tackle, because we know how good that rushing offense is. I mean, they're 3rd in the country in rush yards per game. And then against Auburn, they had 3 players over 100 yards. They rushed for over 400 yards on the ground. And it's kind of an interesting way that they do that as well, which I think we can dive into here in a second. Is there anything else I don't know, is in secondary or something else that maybe you saw to add on that in terms of what LSU maybe needs to do differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've spoken to much of it. I mean, LSU has struggled against the run, especially in these past 2 games. I mean, giving up 263 yards on the ground to Tennessee, giving up 199 to Florida. I mean, and then you've got Ole Miss, who have 2 running backs that are averaging over 6 yards a carry. And then you've got even a quarterback who's a little bit of a dual threat also. I mean, he's averaging 7 yards a carry on 53 attempts. So I think, as we start talking about Ole Miss, stacking the box is going to be especially critical, but also apparently they have a little bit of a unique style of running. Do you care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's the thing. If you come up and stack the box, Ole Miss does have the capability to trust some one-on-one on the outside, and then maybe you're in trouble. So what they do is it's not the same as Tennessee, but maybe conceptually there is some similarities. Also, you maybe look at kind of like the old Baylor. They're sort of like this, where everything is spread out on the perimeter. Their perimeter run game is really good. And then that forces you to have a lighter box. And then they can just attack you straight up the middle once you sort of transition to that. But if you don't have enough guys in the box, then they'll attack you on the edges. So it's sort of like as a defensive coordinator, you have to kind of figure out, how you're going to defend all that space, because it's not easy. We saw Auburn, struggle with it. Most teams that Ole Miss has played has struggled with it. And we'll get into a second here how Ole Miss hasn't necessarily played a lot of top-tier teams. But that's kind of what they do. And conceptually, it's a little bit like Tennessee, in that Tennessee's wide receivers, as I think most people remember, were almost on the sideline. And LSU really struggled with that. It makes me think it's going to be interesting to see. We don't know yet. I might ask Brian Kelly this tomorrow, but how they use Harold Perkins in this game, because remember against Tennessee, they had him at Sam linebacker. He didn't play much because everything was so spread out. Well, Ole Miss runs a spread, and it's not the exact same style, but they have a lot of things out on the edges, and they're able to run the football very effectively out of that. This is not the Lane Kiffin of last year with Matt Corral, where they're throwing the ball all over the place. This is very much a run-heavy offense, but they can attack you through the air if you get too aggressive trying to defend the run. So it's going to have to be balanced and tackle really well, like we mentioned earlier. And off of that, LSU, though, you heard Lane Kiffin on the teleconference today. Ole Miss, they've got a good win over Kentucky, although they got a little bit lucky there at the end. How much do we really believe in this Ole Miss team yet? I mean, is this sort of a top 10 team? Because I think, as Lane Kiffin said, like, this is probably the best team that they've played. When you look at kind of Ole Miss's schedule, what do you make of what they've accomplished so far?
Yeah, so Ole Miss is number 7 in the AP poll this week, and it's kind of like, and as an AP voter, I'm kind of like, I don't know, because Ole Miss has played, let's look at it, Troy, Central Arkansas, Georgia Tech, Tulsa, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, and Auburn. So they've played kind of the bottom of the SEC schedule, if you are thinking talent-wise, maybe except for Missouri. But Auburn's got a coach that's probably on his way out, and that was a little bit of a closer game than we anticipated. And Vanderbilt was handled, and then Kentucky was a little bit of a more lucky loss, 22-19 there. And so this is one of those teams in the top 25 that hasn't really been tested. And at this point in the season, a lot of other teams have been tested, like even LSU, who's not even in the top 25, played Tennessee. They played Mississippi State, who is still in the top 25, but Ole Miss really hasn't played like an opponent who has remained a top 25 team as of week 7. So I think it is actually kind of Ole Miss's first true test. Like last week, Penn State got their first true test against Michigan, didn't play very well. Now, again, Michigan was number 4 and Penn State was number 10, but still. You've got, TCU finally went through its first test this weekend with Oklahoma State. There's a lot of other teams that are kind of left in the top 10 that are kind of just there because like they haven't lost. So Ole Miss is one of them. And Lane Kiffin, he said today, like, admittedly, like, I'm pleased with the 7-0 start. 3 new coordinators. They have a new special teams coordinator, and they promoted their tight ends coach to like a co-offensive coordinator. And then they have a brand new defensive coordinator from Western Kentucky. So they have a lot of new staff members, and you've got a new quarterback, Jackson Dart, a lot of transfers. So they're pleased with the 7-0 start, but they also don't know what to make of it. And so he did say, I think LSU will be the most talented opponent that we have faced yet this season.
It's going to be interesting to see how it all goes down. I also, before we maybe wrap up, if anyone has any questions, fire them our way, use the comments section there we'll try to answer those at the end. For LSU, like you said, we're going to maybe learn a lot about whether or not Ole Miss is legitimate. This is kind of the first, I don't want to exclude Kentucky, but this is sort of like the first game where like of the back half of their schedule that starts to get really tough. Like they've got Arkansas and Alabama and Texas A&M and a whole bunch of, one more other team on the docket there for Ole Miss. And so we'll find out a lot about them. But, LSU, does this really change maybe the outlook of the season? Like if LSU wins this game, they go to 6-2, they're tied for first in the SEC West heading into the open date before playing Alabama with a chance to actually take the lead in the SEC West. It's probably getting ahead of ourselves because we've sort of said this whole time that year one is about building, and that to having these conversations already maybe be premature. But does this really what does this mean for the rest of LSU season if they were to win this game?
Well, first of all, bowl eligibility. I mean, I know that's like kind of like a bottom, kind of like a rock, something that LSU fans expect every year. But still, for a first year head coach, that is an accomplishment. I think getting wins over a good Mississippi State team and getting a win over Ole Miss. I mean, how many SEC wins we got under new head coach Brian Kelly? That would be Mississippi State, Auburn, Florida, Ole Miss. Yeah, I mean, like that's quite the accomplishment, and I think that LSU fans should feel very confident about like their future, especially in the conference too. And I think that would say a lot. And I think, yeah, LSU could take home a couple more wins. A&M's not looking too good. I love saying that. And then Arkansas has also kind of been on a downhill lately ever since they're on like a losing streak. So, I mean, I think that, I think things are looking up for this LSU team, especially if they get the win over Ole Miss this weekend. Even if not, like, I think there's still a chance for this team to, probably do well given the fact that it is a building season with a lot of new faces.
Yeah, that's the thing about it. It's like either way, win or loss, this whole year, it's like you don't want to make too much of the outcome. Like enjoy it if they win, and be critical, certainly, if they lose, especially the way they did against Tennessee. But it was always kind of about building toward year 2, year 3, and more of what's happening maybe behind the scenes, and not as much the product on the field, though certainly that matters because it's a reflection of what's going on behind the scenes. But it's sort of that building of a program and of a culture is sort of what this year is all about. But yeah, I think that this win would sort of prove that LSU under Brian Kelly can contend in the SEC, even though it's early. If you were to start off 4-1 in the league, and especially if they finish strong in November, right out the gate, you're playing pretty well. That's a good sign anyway. And it certainly, I think, would give the fan base quite a lot of confidence heading into year 2 and certainly in year 3, when by year 3 you're expected to compete for the division, for the entire league, and for even to get into the playoff by then. They would probably give fans some juice and some confidence that that's going to happen, and that certainly doesn't hurt anything at all if they're able to do that. So it's going to be quite the weekend. But at the same token, if they do lose, not all is lost. I think that's kind of the case for every game this year. If they do happen to lose, they ended up 7-5 this season. Like not all is lost. But it certainly gives you a lot more confidence if they end up winning this game, go 8-4, or even maybe 9-3 at that point. We'll have to see. You got to get through it first, obviously, and that comes at 2:30 this weekend in Tiger Stadium on CBS. We'll have all your coverage over at theadvocate.com and NOLA.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. We have this show every single Wednesday afternoon, time fluctuating depending on what's going on, usually 2 p.m. And then you can find us on Twitter and other sorts of places. So please subscribe to The Advocate and check us out over there. We appreciate everybody watching, and we'll have all your coverage after the game. So for Leah and everybody else at The Advocate, I'm Wilson Alexander. This has been The Advocate's LSU Sports Update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.